Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the first ever Bishop Barron Presents. Thank you. My name is Matt Nelson. I'm the Assistant Director of the Word on Fire Institute, and I'll be your MC for this evening. And I thought I would just be transparent with you right from the beginning. You probably noticed that by my thick accent that I'm a foreigner. I come from the exotic land of Canada, the land that flows with milk and maple syrup. I'm not sure how many of you have been there before, but anyways, I flew down yesterday from Saskatchewan, that's in central Canada, and I'm always a little jittery coming out here because the first time I was here in California, there was an earthquake, and I was in my hotel room, and the walls start creaking, and I was like I can't remember what floor I was. I just remember Joe Glore, our producer at Word on Fire, sending me a text right away. Did you feel that? Your first time here, and you get an earthquake. So it was a very small tremor, but I looked out my window expecting to see buildings falling and all that sort of thing. It's a naive Canadian, but... yeah, and I was, thank you, Father Steve. Father Steve Grunow is the CEO of Word on Fire, and he approved me to be the MC tonight, which was somewhat surprising because he's always a little bit worried that people are not going to understand me when I speak Canadian. And so what I promised I would do is Americanize my Canadian tonight by avoiding saying things like or apologizing to you every second sentence and all that sort of thing. But it really is a pleasure tonight to be your MC. And I want to thank all of you, first of all, here in theater tonight, here in Santa Barbara, California. Thank you for taking the time to be here. We're just so pleased to have so many of our good friends of Word on Fire here under one roof. So it's really just so good to have all of you here and to meet you. And I also want to give a special thank you to all those on our live stream that are taking this in from wherever you happen to be in the world. Thank you so much to the many people who are watching us from abroad right now and from the rest of America. And, our Bishop Barron's followers, the people that are following Word on Fire and that are members of our Word on Fire Institute, they come from all over the world. And so it's just such a pleasure to have so many good people with us tonight, both locally and from afar. Now, before I introduce the theme for tonight, what I'd like to do is first tell you a little bit about how tonight's going to work. And I'll be brief with these instructions. But basically, how this is going to go is, in a few minutes, I'm going to call Leah Libresco up tonight to give her talk. And following Leah's talk, we're going to take a 10-minute intermission. Now, Leah's talk and this introduction right now, that's being live streamed to our Facebook audience right now. But following that 10-minute intermission, there's going to be a discussion between Bishop Robert Barron and Leah Libresco, moderated by Jared Zimmerer. And that's going to be exclusively available to those who are members of our Word on Fire Institute. And so for those watching on live stream right now, if you're not a Word on Fire Institute member, we'd like to really invite you to consider joining. And you'll have plenty of time to do that during our 10-minute intermission. Just go to wordonfire.institute, and there'll be easy instructions to sign up, and you'll be able to take in the second half of tonight's event. So again, just want to emphasize the second part tonight, the discussion with Bishop Robert Barron, moderated by Jared Zimmerer, and with our special guest, Leah Libresco. That will be exclusive to Word on Fire Institute members only. So be sure to sign up for that. Now, before I invite Leah up, Jared Zimmerer, the director of the Word on Fire Institute, has asked that I take a few minutes tonight to tell you about the Word on Fire Institute. And he's also asked me to take a few extra minutes as well to talk about how tonight's event and our theme of arguing with atheists in good faith is so pertinent to Bishop Barron's overall missionary vision. So bear with me for the next few moments as I do that. Several years ago, Cardinal Francis George suggested to Bishop Barron that the Word on Fire ministry was becoming something more, a movement. This remark from Cardinal George, the spiritual grandfather of Word on Fire, was like a seed that immediately took root and began to grow in the mind and heart of Bishop Barron. A movement. What does that mean exactly? Well, as John Allen Jr. describes in To Light a Fire on the Earth, a movement is generally speaking and in a Catholic sense, a group in which lay people and clergy come together to be formed in a common spirituality and eventually to be turned loose on the world to pursue some sort of shared mission. Well, the mission of Word on Fire has been the same from the beginning, to proclaim Jesus Christ to the culture. And in the past few years, Bishop Barron, along with our team at Word on Fire, have taken some major steps to make the Word on Fire movement further from a mere idea and closer to a reality. Perhaps the biggest step that we've taken so far has been the launch of the Word on Fire Institute. Anxious to move forward with his vision of a Word on Fire community, a community formed together spiritually and trained as missionaries to proclaim Christ to our increasingly secular world, Bishop Barron decided it was time to create an official institute of Word on Fire, a place not only for common spiritual and intellectual formation, but also a place that could serve to unite people from all over the world who share a unique desire to become smart, courageous, and effective evangelists in and of the modern culture. So from this desire, the Word on Fire Institute was born. On October 1st, 2018, the feast day of St. Therese of Lisieux, we launched the new Word on Fire Institute. And since our launch only 7 months ago, we now have over 4,000 active members of the Word on Fire Institute from all over the world. We also have a rapidly growing roster of Word on Fire Institute fellows. So these are experts in areas like theology, philosophy, sociology, literature, science, and practical evangelization, who, along with Bishop Barron, have created video courses for the Word on Fire Institute members. Our fellows, in addition to creating courses and study materials, maintain an ongoing relationship with our institute by writing articles or interacting in the discussion forums with members who are taking their courses. And they also participate in video interviews, like during our digital summit in February, which was a big success for us. We're absolutely thrilled about the early successes of the Word on Fire Institute and grateful for God's continual providence. But we ask for your continued prayers and support, of course, as we proceed with our ongoing development of this important Word on Fire initiative. So before I call Leah up, I'm just going to speak for a few more minutes now about tonight's theme and how that fits into Bishop Barron's overall vision and the Word on Fire Institute. So as I mentioned a few moments ago, the aim of the Word on Fire Institute is to unite and train its members to evangelize in our modern world. This task of being an effective evangelist on the front lines of what is largely a religiously disengaged and disinterested culture is by no means an easy one. As you all know, over the past few years, study after study has shown that the religiously unaffiliated, the NONES, the nuns, have become the fastest growing denomination, so to speak, in America, with about a quarter of Americans today self-identifying with no religion whatsoever. In addition to these stats, the best and most recent studies have also shown that about 1/10 of Americans today don't believe in God. Now, 1/10 might seem somewhat negligible, but let's not be fooled. That's almost 33 million people. And the younger the demographic, the more grim the numbers become. Consider, for instance, the recent work done by Notre Dame sociologist Dr. Christian Smith, who you've probably heard Bishop Barron reference before. He's done some great work at Notre Dame, and he's done a lot of work on young Catholics in America. Well, Smith and his team of researchers have determined that roughly a half of Catholic teens today are dropping their Catholic identity by the time they reach their late 20s. Among those fallen away Catholics, almost 50% either don't believe in God or they're unsure about the existence of God. And to add to that, Smith has found that, quote, most former Catholics, similar to emerging adults generally, believe that science and religion often conflict with each other. Smith concludes that the data he has collected suggests that the perception of religious faith as unscientific is a pervasive trend of this younger generation. So we have an urgent matter on our hands then, as you can see. Rates of atheism, agnosticism, and other forms of skepticism among Americans, at least in the raw empirical data, are showing no sure signs of decreasing. Slowly and painfully, we've watched this growth in religious skepticism develop for almost 2 decades now. Since the September 11th attacks on this soil, a rapid rise in hostility towards religion has been apparent as religion has been named the main culprit behind much of the violence and intolerance in today's society. This rise in anti-religious sentiment has been especially propagated by those we've come to know as the new atheists. You're probably familiar with some of the names. There's the original poster boys of the new atheism, like Richard Dawkins or the late Christopher Hitchens. And then there's the newer new atheists, like Lawrence Krauss or Bill Maher or Bill Nye. You're probably also familiar with the popular books of the new atheists. Maybe you've heard of these. The God Delusion, for example, The End of Faith. Maybe you've heard of Hitchens' book, God is Not Great. Well, these books and others stirred a tide of atheism in the mid-2000s, and many of these became immediate bestsellers upon release. The publication of these books, writes one prominent atheist, quote, lit a fire that helped promote secularism in the West and elsewhere. And that fire is still burning, he writes, and consuming belief. New atheism isn't dead. It's just becoming a mainstream idea, end quote. Those are the words of biologist Jerry Coyne. He just wrote those about a month ago on his blog. Now, the New Atheists movement, new in its anti-religious ardor and flippant expression, as compared to, say, the existentialist atheism of Jean-Paul Sartre or Albert Camus, has taken hold of the minds and hearts of many over the past several years, especially the minds and hearts of the young. I'm not so sure that Jerry Coyne is right that the new atheism is just becoming a mainstream idea, but one thing is for sure. Whether the new atheism is on its way in or on its way out, whatever the case, enough damage has been done. Now, I want to stress before I finish here that the new atheism is not the only atheism in town. Serious atheists like Graham Oppy in Australia, or Quinton Smith, or Thomas Nagel, all of whom are highly respectable philosophers in their own right, have not taken the same approach to argument as the new atheists. Instead of resorting to caricatures and ad hominems, these philosophers, these skeptical thinkers, have sought to engage arguments for God's existence with philosophical subtlety and genuine thoughtfulness. And at times, yes, they have even provided arguments that are worth taking seriously. If any young person today finds himself an atheist, these are the thinkers they ought to be reading. These are the intellectuals they ought to be emulating. And for us Catholics, these are the atheists worth taking seriously. Which brings us back finally to why we're here tonight. This evening's event is meant to reflect one of the Word on Fire Institute's primary goals: to train Catholics to speak charitably, intelligently, and persuasively to those who disagree with them, or to make what Bishop Barron has called a good religious argument. To read all about that, get his new book, Arguing Atheism. Indeed, nobody has been a better model for this, for giving a good religious argument, than Bishop Robert Barron himself. And so for all of us, it's going to be an absolute privilege tonight to have both him and former atheist Leah Libresco on stage tonight to discuss how to argue with atheists in good faith. Now, brief word to our online viewers. I just want to remind you one more time that you're going to hear Leah's talk here in a minute, but we're going to take an intermission after that. After that, for the second part of tonight, you need to be a member of the Word on Fire Institute to hear the discussion between Leah, Bishop Barron, moderated by Jared Zimmerer. So again, wordonfire.institute is where you want to go if you want to take in the second part of tonight's event. And we'd love to have you in the Institute. There's a lot more to be offered there as well. So be sure to give that some thought, and we'd love to have you aboard. And now, without further delay, let me introduce Mrs. Libresco. Raised in an atheist home, Leah Libresco sought no good reasons to believe in the existence of God. But through a debate club at Yale University, her ideas of faith, God, and Christianity were challenged, and eventually she came to realize that truth is much larger than her atheism allowed. Through various relationships and reading the likes of C.S. Lewis and G.K. Chesterton, Leah began to take the claims of Catholicism much more seriously. She was eventually received into the Catholic Church in November 2012. Her conversion was a big deal. It was big news, and it was even featured or covered by various media outlets like CNN or NBC News. I'll also mention that Leah is a great author. She's written some phenomenal books. Two of the books that you want to check out is her book, Arriving at Amen and Building the Benedict Option. And I should also mention that she's a Word on Fire Institute Fellow. And so, without any more delay, ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome to the stage Mrs. Leah Libresco Sargeant.
So tonight I'm here to talk about some strategies for arguing well in good faith with atheists. Though I'll admit, I think the strategies work pretty well for arguing with just about anyone, so you can take them out for a spin. And most people who are going to give you advice about arguments are going to give you advice about how to win an argument, how to construct an argument so that there's no way out for your opponent, how to back them into a corner and get them finally, eventually, to concede. My advice tonight is not going to be primarily about how to win an argument, but how to be prepared to lose an argument. And the reason is, when two people come into conflict, the only thing that's guaranteed is at least one of them needs to lose. But the fact that I disagree with someone else isn't a guarantee that I'm right just because I'm pretty sure they're wrong. So the only thing I know for sure once a disagreement starts, even if I'm very confident that I'm the one in the right, is that at the end of this, at least one of us needs to lose. And sometimes it does have to be me. I'm extremely fortunate that my friends helped me to learn how to lose an argument gracefully when I was in college and gave me the chance to listen to the prompting of the Holy Spirit and become Catholic. But without a tutoring in how to lose an argument, I don't know that I would have gotten there. And the moment you kind of launch yourself into a disagreement, you are your opponent's teacher in how to be prepared to lose. Or really, as Christians, how to be prepared to be docile to the truth. Because all of us have had moments of needing correction and needing to submit to that correction gratefully. And in an argument, what I want to do is give my opponent the chance to embrace that. You know, I really saw this modeled for me very strongly when I went to Yale University as an undergrad and joined a debating circle. And I joined specifically the one that had the weirdest, smartest, wrong people that I could find. Because if I were going to argue with people who were right, we'd all just sit around, congratulating each other. And I wanted to talk to people who were really smart, like seemed really respectable, and yet were Christian, which I found very confusing. So I thought helpfully I would go and explain to them why they shouldn't do that anymore. And then we could just continue being really smart, really interesting, really weird atheists. And instead, much to my surprise, here I am. And part of how that happened is that my debating group, wasn't exactly like, the debating groups you may have been in a competitive debate circuit where you take sides at random, argue in front of judges, score points, and it's really an exercise in rhetoric. How well can you construct an argument so that a judge can recognize that you've put one forward and your opponent didn't answer it? But we only debated things we thought were actually true. You stuck to the side you believed in. Because after all, it was kind of dangerous to stand there arguing for things you thought were false. What if you were really good at arguing them, and then people believed them, and then lived their lives that way? So that was always the stakes. There were no judges, no prizes. Like, the stakes were the rest of the lives of everyone in the room, and it was always an open question. After tonight, how will you live your life differently? And the other thing that was great is that people really modeled that the expectation in this room was that, if you were smart, interesting, brought in good ideas to the table, at some point during your undergraduate career, you would change someone's mind. You would alter the course of their whole life. But the assumption was also probably that you would at some point find something that you, when entering college as an 18-year-old, were wrong about and would make that concession and change your life accordingly. Sometimes that might be on enormous, entire worldview altering things like me, who changed my mind about religion. Sometimes people made smaller concessions about how a hypothetical monarchy should be structured. So I won't say we were always debating for the highest stakes, but there was always an assumption that debate involved putting your ideas on the line and putting them at risk. Now, hopefully you guys here tonight are willing to do that, and folks on the live stream are, but your interlocutor may not. So here's kind of my strategy for inviting someone into a debate in which you're willing to really be vulnerable and be docile to the truth. And it starts with giving up any trick or tool of rhetoric that works no matter whether the ideas you're using to support it are true. That means something like kind of keeping up the pace of the argument so your opponent can't keep up, and when they run out of breath, you go, oh, so you're wrong, yes? It didn't have an answer for me. I think that means you're wrong and I win. All set? It means even expecting you can resolve things in a single encounter, a single argument. It's much easier to be kind of bullied into thinking something wrong in a single argument, but the truth is true enough to stand, to put it out there, to cast the seed on whatever ground it may find, and to let the shoots grow. And in my case, there was one definitive argument near the end of my conversion that kind of turned the key, but it had been 4 years of arguments, a lot of books that were added to my bookshelf to get to the point where the soil was prepared for that argument. Defending the truth is a relay race, not a sprint. And it's only people who don't believe that the truth will keep asserting itself that need to close off an argument in one go. Because if you don't get the concession now, you can't trust that the world is going to force the person to it. Now, I have trouble sticking to these principles in the heat of the argument because I am still competitive, and I do kind of get drawn towards that will not to be docile to the truth, but to dominate, to just be smarter than my opponent, more persuasive than my opponent, until finally they concede that I, and by I mean my ideas, are better than theirs. So the main thing that I found to be helpful in shifting my mindset so that I really can be open to the truth, the thing I'm allegedly trying to hand on to my opponent, is kind of stirring up two different emotions besides the will to dominate: curiosity and compassion. And for me, that movement towards curiosity is kind of a place I hopefully can get to even if I start angry. I try and approach an argument, by planning ahead and approaching it, praying for my interlocutor ahead of time. But sometimes I realize I'm in the middle of an argument while it's already happening and I'm already angry. And there, I'm struggling. I do try and pray in that moment, but it's really hard for me to get all the way from, how can you be so wrong, to, this person is a beloved child of God seeking the truth. And so I don't do it in one jump. I just try and go from, how can you be so wrong, to, how can you be so wrong? How are you doing it? I respect you in other parts of your life, and yet you're so wrong about this. It's infuriating, but also confusing. And for me, the biggest gift that gives me is that when I'm angry, all I want from my opponent is the concession. I want them to give up what they have. And I almost don't care about them. I just want that moment of, I'm sorry, Leah, you were right and I was wrong. I'm very embarrassed. But once I'm curious, that concession isn't enough. That sense of driving to annihilate them, which is not only sinful, is now no longer even the illusion of satisfying. Because I want to know something particular about this person. What are you thinking? How can you be so wrong? And I can't get it by bullying them. I have to leave space in the conversation to hear them unpack their ideas, so that I understand what's led them to this point and to this view, and to see where we diverge several steps further back to wind up with me, now a Catholic, and them still an atheist to date. And once I get there, it's no longer enough to shout over them, to just throw reading material at them. I have to want to know them. And if I can, I want to go one step further. Sometimes in the moment, I'm just like, Lord, if you just get me to curiosity, that would be enough. But if I can push a little further, I want to move from, how can you be so wrong, to, what are you in love with? Because St. Thomas Aquinas echoes Aristotle in saying no one does evil but for the sake of a perceived good. And whatever idea my interlocutor is defending, whatever has brought them to their particular philosophy, they're doing it because they're trying to be a good person and trying to be a truthful person. And so in order to be able to argue with them, to get that sense of how can you be so wrong, I have to look at what perceived good they're serving. And it might be a dumb perceived good. I think a number of my friends felt that way about me, once they got past, oh, so you're an atheist. I'm like, well, yes, I am an atheist, but obviously that doesn't tell you how to live your life. What I am is a Stoic deontologist. And I was about this height, I suppose, but younger looking. And it was a very strong claim to make. And then I tried to make everyone else Stoic deontologists too. And so, no one who's trying to answer the question of my atheism would ever get to the meat of the matter by just going, why don't you believe in God? Because it wasn't my disbelief in God that was organizing my whole life. It was my desire to know truth and do good. And my ways of going about it were classical, but a little bonkers sometimes. So it was kind of by coaxing out that desire I had for truth, for goodness, and ultimately also for beauty, that my friends were able to make the argument against my atheism, not just by attacking the philosophical supports for atheism, not just by attacking Stoic deontology, because that only got me as far as virtue ethics, though that helped, but by really saying, you've got the right idea here, Leah. You should want to know the truth. You do want to do good. We just disagree about how you should be doing it. And when you can get to that point with someone, that point of agreement, the view of them really loving what you love, loving a perceived good that maybe is a true good, but they're serving it in a way that isn't ideal. Loving something that is only a perceived good, and the more you look at their fire of their love for it, the more you realize you want that love directed towards a true good. You could never want that moment of, I'm so sorry, Leah, I was wrong and you were right. I promise not to have any more feelings about anything unless you give me permission. Because I would have quashed that love. At worst, my opponents are like Don Quixote, nobly sallying forth to claim a washing basin as a helmet. And when I see the ardor of their love, I can't wish to strike their helmets, their philosophy simply out of their hands and leave them empty. I say, you are a beautiful lover, and you have chosen a very strange object for your love. But all I wish to do is kindle it and redirect it. And that's kind of always the opportunity we have when we find ourselves in the middle of an argument. It's not just a matter of defending the truth by itself. God is truth. God is sufficient. God doesn't need our defense. What the person we're arguing with needs is a chance to know the truth and to love the truth and to get a sense of what that entails. So when I'm doing this, I'm trying to help my opponent do what I'm doing, to have that sense of curiosity and compassion. But aside from sometimes making them go to my talks or having you guys convey these messages outside the fight, so that by the time you're fighting, they're already interested in how could you be so wrong. The other thing I find that really helps just is making arguments comfortable and making them part of my friendship. In our college debating group, we did debate once a week, Thursday night, from about 7:45 to, I usually left by 1 or 2 a.m., so I can't say for sure how late we went. Debates were always part of a continuing conversation, sometimes till dawn, though usually not for me. But all debates are part of a continuing conversation. And so when you're in the middle of an argument with a friend, make it clear that it's safe for them to not resolve this today and to still be your friend, but that you're interested in continuing to talk about it. And if they come back and go, you know what, I thought of like 3 things I should have said to you, and I went and did some more reading, and now I have other things, you go, excellent, I anticipate we're going to argue about this for quite some time, so I'm glad we're both really investing in this relationship. Give your friend, kind of the comfort of knowing that when they show weakness or uncertainty, you won't take that as cowardice. So often someone might be on the cusp of admitting something that really has given them pause about their own ideas or their own philosophy, or something that truly attracts them about yours. But in every other argument to this point, the ones they've had, the ones they've seen on TV, the moment someone says, yeah, I do struggle with how to resolve that, is the moment the other person goes, so you're wrong and you're stupid. And if you want someone to know that it's safe to explore their doubts with you, you again have to be the one to model that by being willing to say, especially when someone asks you hard questions, I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. I'm going to have to go look that up, or, talk to the Dominican friars I know who seem to know everything, or do some more reading, or ask someone in the Word on Fire Institute forums. But I don't know that right now. Or even the harder thing, I think, than simple ignorance is, yeah, that bothers me, and I haven't figured out completely how to resolve it. That troubles me, and it's not enough to shift the balance of my faith, but you're right, that bothers me too. And it's kind of by giving that demonstration that we open the door for our interlocutors to share what are kind of the most private parts of their heart, what they truly love and they're trying to defend, and the fears they have that they might be doing the wrong thing. Because ultimately, whenever we find ourselves drawn into argument, the way I like to think of what our project is really drawn from a quote by Rebecca West in her book, Black Lamb, Gray Falcon, where she says, she contrasts kind of the argument culture of the West that she's used to, the argument culture of the Slavs, since she's traveling in Yugoslavia between the world wars. And she says, with her penchant for broad generalization about culture, in the West, conversation is thought to be an acceptable way of sharing information or passing the time. But among Slavs, it is thought to be a waste if the people do not pool their information to travel further towards the redemption of the world. And that's ultimately what I think every argument is. An argument is a chance to move towards the redemption of the world, towards making all things one in Christ. Whether it's an argument that obviously hinges on who he is, when we speak to someone else about their disbelief and we try and get them to be interested in wondering whether Christ is in fact the way, the truth, and the life. Or even in the very small petty arguments where if you decided them by a coin flip, it would not matter, of who will bring the pie to Thanksgiving this year. Each of those is an invitation to renounce division and ask to be part of Christ's work of redemption of the world. Because ultimately, we want to be wholly docile to the truth, wholly submerged in it, and we want to be with God. And we want every single person we know and love, or don't love yet, but are at the anger stage, so we're hoping to move towards love through curiosity, to be there with us. And that means being wholly united before the beatific vision. And every argument closed eventually, and closed in love, is a small anticipation of that ultimate Easter glory. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leah. That was excellent. Thank you so much. So I think you've given us a lot of different avenues now to take this discussion in a few minutes. That was phenomenal. So thank you very much. Let's give Leah one more round of applause, please. Well, two quick things. Okay, first of all, I went and sat down after my introduction, and something was not sitting right with me. And I realized that I had said that Bishop Barron wrote a book called Arguing Atheism. It's arguing religion. So I want to put people at ease. Okay, Bishop Barron has not converted to atheism. He's as devout as ever. He's a Catholic bishop, and I can just trust me on this one. So my bad. It's Arguing Religion. Check that book out. He wrote that book, in fact, hoping that it would be the skeptics or the doubters, the non-Christians who would pick that book up and read it. So that's a book for believers and non-believers. So Arguing Religion, that's the book. All right. Second of all, before we go to intermission, so as I said, one last time, I'm going to be like a broken record tonight on this. We have a 10-minute intermission coming up right in a moment. The second half tonight of Bishop Barron Presents is going to be exclusive only to Word on Fire Institute members. So if you're not a Word on Fire Institute member and you want to take in the discussion tonight between Leah and Bishop Barron, which will be moderated by the Word on Fire Institute director, Jared Zimmerer, you need to be a member. So go to wordonfire.institute, wordonfire.institute, and register to be a member. You'll get all sorts of courses in there, a course on the theology of Hans Urs von Balthasar from Bishop Robert Barron. There's a course on reaching the indifferent. There's a course on the principles of Word on Fire from Jared Zimmerer. And a course that a lot of people are excited about right now by Dr. Holly Ordway on imaginative apologetics, and much, much more. So go to wordonfire.institute. And there you can register. The 10 minutes during the intermission will be plenty of time to get signed up. So we just want to invite you to do that. And it's now time to take a break. So we'll see you all in 10 minutes for a discussion.